Hello and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you, whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita.
I'm Ron.
And I'm hoping my mom hit record.
I hit record.
Okay.
She's Jean Marie. Collectively, we're the hosts of PodcastDX. We spoke with our next guest a few years back about toxoplasmosis, and on today's show, we are talking again with Raina about disability etiquette.
And Raina is a special education teacher in the Chicago suburbs. Hi, Raina. How have you been since we last talked with you?
Good. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on again today.
That's great. Raina, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. What is it like doing remote teaching as a special ed teacher during COVID?
It's very interesting right now. So I work with kindergarten, first and second grade students. We just switched to remote learning this week. So this was our first week back online. When we were in person, it was difficult to follow some of those COVID procedures like mask wearing and social distancing. Everyone's really doing the best we can. And the population that I work with, it requires a lot of help and hands-on support as well. So
Right.
My remote group is challenging, but it is what it is, and I'm glad that, we're making progress still.
Well, that's good. And could you tell us exactly what is disability etiquette and people first language?
Sure. So the CDC says that people first language is used to communicate appropriately and respectfully with and about an adult with a disability or an individual with a disability. So people first language emphasizes the person first and not the disability.
And why is this important?
While those outside of social services or education community may have no idea what this is or why it's important, the language that we use has a tremendous impact on the lives of many people we encounter day to day.
And I kind of feel like the best possible solution is to try and be more respectful towards everyone, treat everyone like a person and not, an object or not a disease. They're an individual.
Exactly. So, for instance, we are speaking about people with a disability, not disabled people.
That's exactly right. And actually, I do also work in the field, and there's some other basic guidelines that I can go over if you'd like to.
Sure, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. First, please refer to a person ability, not their disability, unless, of course, it's relevant. And secondly, what you just alluded to, where you acknowledge the people first rather than the disability, and avoid referring to groups of people by their disability or their condition, like the blind or the deaf. Third, avoid terms. People use things like victim or suffers from or afflicted with. Stay away from that and avoid portraying people with disabilities as courageous or overly courageous or brave, or my favorite one is special. This implies that it's unusual for somebody with a disability to be independent or, competent.
Right. So basically, never say anything that you would not want said to or about yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Again, you're talking about the person who just so happens to have a disability. You're not putting that person in a box. You're giving them the respect they deserve.
And I know we're guilty of this as well. I know we've said before someone is suffering from, or, we have used those terms, and we'll try to be more cognizant of that.
But again, if you're not in the field or you're not used to using it, you're not going to be as cognizant about it. But when you hear about it and you learn about it, then you do become more cognizant. And it's all about learning, and then it becomes part of your daily life. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think even being in the field, I know I've slipped as well or said something, and then later on I think about how I could have changed it or what I could say differently.
Right.
So everyone slips, even if you're in the field. It's just important to educate yourself and think about what you could have said differently for next time.
Great.
Sure.
And I know some common courtesies that should be used are as follows. When talking to someone with a disability, speak directly to him or her rather than through a companion or a sign language interpreter. Also, don't assume that a person accompanying someone in a wheelchair is an attendant. They may be a friend, a partner, or a family member.
Mm-hmm.
If you would normally shake hands with people you meet, offer your hand to someone with a disability as well. And if they are unable to shake your hand, they will let you know. And in our current pandemic, who even knows when we'll be able to shake hands
we won't
again.
be shaking
Got that
hands
right.
for a while. You're right.
Yeah. Be considerate of the extra time it might take for someone with a disability to get things done or said. Let the person set the pace for walking or talking.
Mm-hmm.
When talking with a person who speaks slowly or with great effort, never pretend to understand if you are having trouble doing so. Ask them to repeat what you do not understand, or ask if writing notes would be okay. Leaning on a person's wheelchair is similar to leaning on a person. The wheelchair is a part of the person's personal space. So if you are going to be talking for more than a few minutes, place yourself at their level to spare yourself a sore neck.
Them too, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, they're kind of craning their neck
They're
upwards
looking
to
up.
see
Exactly.
you. Yeah, yeah.
When speaking to someone who is blind or has low vision, also remember to introduce yourself or anyone who's with you.
Mm-hmm.
So indicate that you're going to move from one place to another, or when the conversation is at the end, so that they know.
Mm-hmm.
It is all right to offer assistance, but wait till your offer is accepted before you help. Do not feel obligated to act as a caregiver, and do not feel offended if the person declines your offer.
Let me just jump in there real quick. You know what comes to mind is the beginning of The Odd Couple, where the elderly lady's walking across the street, and I think it was Felix went to grab her and help her across the street, and she started hitting him with her umbrella because he was offering help, and she didn't want it.
Right.
So, Raina, The Odd Couple is a TV show.
Millennials.
I
yes.
think I'm showing my age
Yeah.
here. Sorry.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
I just know what it is because our friend has named her cats Felix and Oscar. Otherwise, yeah.
And actually, a more current example of what you were talking about, if I can interrupt, and then we'll go back to it, is there was a recent roast. You know what a roast is? Not a thing that you eat, but like a comedy thing on TV. And they were roasting someone. I'm not going to say who because it's not relevant. But one of the roasters, one of the comedians, was
Visually impaired?
no, deaf.
Okay.
And her sign language interpreter went up with her. Mm-hmm. So he was signing, but she, everybody was directing the conversation towards her, not towards her sign language interpreter. So I found that like a good example of what you should be doing. But go ahead, Raina. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. When offering to guide a person who is blind or has low vision, allow that person to take your arm, and this will help them follow your lead, even up and down curbs or stairs. Use specific directions or distances, such as 3 steps away, or you can use clock positions when directing a person. So, for example, the drinking fountain is at 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Service animals are working and should not be touched, pet, or played with unless you have permission from the owner, and it's better to not even ask. Always face a person that is hard of hearing, and when in doubt, ask if it would be okay to write it out. Speaking loudly does not mean you will be heard. When planning events, remember anyone that may have disabilities and their needs. If accessible bathrooms are needed, braille or tactile signage, and menus, etc. Again, as a general rule, if you are unsure, just ask. More often, people will be happy to let you know what they prefer, and they'll also educate you on anything that they need.
Extra help with? Right.
Yeah, they need extra help with or anything that they prefer.
That's
good advice.
Yes, amazing. Very great advice. Thank you. And so let's use some examples on the proper terminology so folks have an idea of what exactly we're talking about.
Sure. I would like to accentuate the positive and correct way to say things, so the examples will be what you should say first.
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay, so you should say a person is living with a disability or has a disability. People with disabilities, uses a wheelchair or use assistive devices. Also, if appropriate, use birth irregularity or birth injury. A person might be hard of hearing or have a speech disability or low or limited vision. A person might have a cognitive, developmental, or intellectual disability. A person can have a seizure disorder or epilepsy. Some people might have a psychiatric disability.
Good suggestions. That's a very positive way to say things.
And I guess the more we use positive terminology and positive language and people first language, the more it'll become, natural.
Right. We should note that this is the current guidelines here in the U.S., and like everything, things change, and we will try to stay current.
Of course.
And Raina, how has people first or person first language affected your work, personal, and social life, or social life?
I would say a lot of people aren't aware, or they just don't think about person first language when talking. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier. Even other teachers or staff members in my building that aren't directly working in special education, they might not know. So just educating them before meetings or when addressing students. And in my personal life, educating my friends and family on person first language, especially because right now I get a lot of questions about being a teacher and how things are going. So taking that opportunity, and I think it's part of my role as a teacher to educate others and advocate for the students in my room, even both when we're in the classroom or school and outside of the classroom. So just getting them that respect that they should get.
That's good advice.
So, speaking of advice, what advice would you have for someone who's trying to use language that isn't damaging, I guess for lack of a better word, that isn't damaging to the people that you're talking about or working with?
Just being conscious when you're talking, and if you're unsure, looking it up online or asking the person, like we talked about, educating yourself. Everyone makes mistakes, and I know I've slipped on it as well, like I mentioned. But just the more conscious that you are of it and the more you educate yourself, it will really help. And thinking about it in your perspective, too, like if you would want someone to label you or address you by race, features, religion, anything like that.
Or short. I'm short.
Laughing because that's exactly what I say.
Yeah. Everybody has something, and you don't want to be talked to as that. You want to be talked to as I, as me, as yes.
Right. And I think that the race, the religion factor, it's also prevalent right now more than ever. So just keeping that in mind and thinking about how you address situations like that for people with disabilities as well.
So I've got a quick question. Do you guys have any in-services or what have you at school prior to the school year? That's something I try to do every year because, sometimes we have staff that turns over, and it's a good reminder for staff that have been there for 10, 20 years because, again, they may not have had that education, that might not be something they're used to doing. So I try to in-service them on specifically what we're talking about now. Are you able to do that at your school?
We don't have a formal meeting or any trainings, but I think that's a really, really great idea, and I actually am going to take that to my school. I love the idea. The turnover, it does happen, and I think people forget or things change like we talked about before. You never know what's going to change. So just making sure everyone's on the same page and has the most up-to-date information, I think that would really be something that's helpful.
And you know who else needs this type of training? And I hope that they're listening. All of the news broadcasters and editors.
I started with that. I've actually wanted to do in-services.
Right. I think they need it. I have called a couple of news stations at times.
I've actually sent an email to a writer, and again, the response I got back is, yeah, you're probably right. You should do like a person with a disability. But he says to me, I only have so much space. So
I'm sorry.
A disabled person.
I'm sorry. No.
I'm just telling you that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Because
take away part of the advertising.
Because what happens is, and this is just generally speaking, people get their information either verbally, either well, they either hear it or they read it, and that's from the news.
Right.
And if you hear it on the news or you read it in print, you think, well, if the news people are saying it, it must be...
Oh, no, it's fake news now.
That's a different issue. But again, if you hear it and you read it, you think it's okay,
Right,
and it's really not.
Right. They need to get on the ball.
Yeah.
And I hope they are. I think that there are many that are, but anybody that's not, I hope that you take this to heart and you learn from it, and you can respect all of the people that are listening, because it's important for all of us.
Any of our local radio and TV stations, not to mention any names, if you're listening, hint, hint.
Okay.
Well, Raina, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this topic. We are pretty passionate about this, and glad to hear that you are too. And we appreciate your time for educating our listeners as well.
And I have
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
It's a silly question, but do teachers have to earn continuing education credits every year? Do you guys certify or recertify so that you're up to date and current?
It kind of depends on the year. It's not really an every year situation, but we do have certain credits and classes that we do need to take.
Okay.
So doing CPI holds, they're called. So that would be calming strategies or holds that you use on students.
Okay.
That's something that we do every year because it's an ever-changing thing. So I think that would be a great time to maybe add that into the certification. And I definitely am going to bring that up, Ron. I love that idea.
Good deal.
I'm always here to help.
Well, thank you, Raina. And if our listeners have any questions or comments related to today's show, they can contact us at PodcastDX@yahoo.com, through our website, PodcastDX.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram.
And if you have a moment to spare, please give us a review wherever you get your podcast. As always, please keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regime. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast.
Till next week.